You don't lose yourself at the peak of anger. You lose yourself earlier, when something small hits you and your mind silently decides it means danger, disrespect, or loss. A message left on read, a tone that feels sharp, a plan that changes without you being asked, a look that makes you feel judged. The event is usually ordinary. The takeover is what's extreme. And that takeover is so fast, you mistake it for your personality. You say, "That's just me," when it's not you. It's a pattern running at high speed. Emotional capture has a signature. It starts with a physical shift you barely notice. The jaw tightens, the chest hardens, the breath becomes shallow, the stomach drops, the face warms. Before your mind forms a sentence, your body has already voted. Then your mind rushes in like a lawyer arriving late to court, not to discover truth, but to justify the verdict. This is where people get trapped. They think the story is proof. They think the urgency is evidence. They think the heat in their body is a command. But an emotion is not an order. It's a signal, and signals can be read without being obeyed. The Stoics were precise about this. They didn't say, "Do not feel." They said, "Do not surrender your steering wheel." They knew that what wrecks a person is not the first impression, but the agreement that follows. The impression arrives uninvited. The agreement is voluntary, even if it feels automatic. That is where your freedom lives. Most people never train that part, so their agreement becomes instant. They merge with the feeling. They become the anger, the anxiety, the jealousy. They speak as it, type as it, decide as it. Then later, when the nervous system cools, they look back at what they did and feel a second wave, shame. Two storms for the price of one. So the first discipline of smart silence is not silence toward others. It's silence inside you, right at the moment the mind starts narrating. Because narration is gasoline. The mind tells a story like, "They don't respect me. I'm being taken for granted. I always get treated like this. If I don't respond, I look weak." And when you swallow those sentences, you don't just feel something. You become possessed by a mission. You start trying to correct the world with your reaction. That's when you lose yourself. Here is the most practical question you can ask, and it sounds simple because it is honest. What exactly happened in facts only? Facts, not interpretations. Facts, not predictions. Facts, not insults disguised as analysis. A fact is, they spoke loudly. A story is, they were trying to humiliate me. A fact is, they didn't reply. A story is, they don't care about me. A fact is, they disagreed. A story is, they're attacking my worth. When you force yourself into facts, you puncture the spell. You create a pause. And that pause is not emptiness. It is power. Most people think control means pushing the emotion down. That fails because whatever you suppress returns with interest. Control means creating a gap between what happens and what you do next. You are not trying to erase emotion. You are trying to stop it from driving. Think of a horse that bolts when it hears noise. You don't hate the horse. You train it. You teach it that noise is not a command to run. Your nervous system is the same. It learned to react. It can learn to pause. Notice how capture also changes your language. When you're taken, you speak in absolutes. Always, never, everyone, no one. You speak faster, sharper, with a need to land a hit. Or you go cold and silent, but not with control, with punishment. Either way, you're no longer choosing. You're trying to relieve the discomfort inside you by exporting it into the world. That's why reactions feel good for a second. They move pressure outward. Then the pressure returns stronger because you traded long-term respect for short-term relief. Smart silence begins when you refuse that trade. When you feel the first surge and you say inwardly, "I notice the pull." That simple sentence creates separation. This is happening in me, but it is not me. I can hold this without acting on it. You don't need to win the argument inside your head. You need to stay sovereign, because the person who cannot pause cannot choose. And the person who cannot choose is not living, he is being lived by triggers. Now be honest with yourself. When you react, what are you really protecting? Is it truth, or is it status? Is it justice, or is it your image? Is it love, or is it fear of being dismissed? The Stoics would call this the moment of examination, not to shame you, but to free you. If you can see what the emotion is trying to accomplish, you can stop serving it blindly. You can choose a better aim. This is why Smartsilence works. It doesn't ask you to become calm after the damage. It teaches you to catch the instant you begin to leave yourself and return before you speak, before you type, before you decide. And once you return, you will notice something that changes everything. The emotion can be loud, but you are louder. You can hold heat without becoming fire. In the next part, we are going to build the skill that makes this reliable. Not a mood, not a motivation, a mechanism. We'll slow down time inside you, so the moment that used to steal you becomes the moment you choose yourself on purpose. Here is the ugly truth most people avoid. You don't react because you lack morals. You react because you lack time. The trigger hits, your body accelerates, and your mind is forced to choose inside a narrow tunnel. In that tunnel, only two options feel available: attack or escape, speak or freeze, prove yourself or punish. That is why you say things you don't mean. That is why you send the message you later delete. That is why you sabotage peace for a moment of relief. Your problem is not emotion. Your problem is zero latency. Emotional latency is the space you create between stimulus and response. It's not spiritual, it's mechanical. If you can widen that space, you can choose. If you can't, you will always call your reaction honesty and your impulse intuition, because you need a reason to respect what you did. But the Stoics would call this slavery. Not slavery to other people, slavery to your own immediacy. So we train latency the way you train strength. Not by wishing, by repetitions. Calm is not a personality trait. Calm is engineered time. And your enemy is not the event, it is speed. Speed is what turns irritation into anger, concern into panic, attraction into jealousy, disappointment into bitterness. Slow down and the same event becomes manageable. Speed up and the same event becomes a storm. The first thing you must understand is that your body starts the reaction before your mind understands it. That's why think positive fails. It arrives late. You need a method that starts where the takeover begins, inside the nervous system. This is where Smartsilence becomes practical. Silence is not just the absence of words. Silence is a break. So I want you to adopt a rule that sounds too small to matter, which is exactly why it works. When you feel the first surge, you do not answer immediately. You do not explain yourself immediately. You do not defend immediately. You buy 3 seconds. 3 seconds is enough to change the entire chain, not because it solves the problem, but because it interrupts momentum. The Stoics called this ruling your ascent. Modern people call it self-control. It is the same thing. You don't stop the first impression, you stop the agreement that follows it. In those 3 seconds, you do one thing that sounds almost childish, but is lethal to impulsive behavior. You exhale once, long and controlled, not as a relaxation trick, as a signal of authority. When you control your exhale, you control your pace. When your pace slows, your mind regains the ability to evaluate. Your body learns that urgency is not always true. Now, a second rule. In the latency window, you do not ask, "How do I feel?" You already know. You ask, "What is required of me?" This is a Stoic shift from emotion to duty. Not duty in the sense of being stiff, duty in the sense of being sane. What response protects my peace? What response protects my future? What response keeps me aligned with the kind of person I claim to be? This question quietly humiliates impulse, because impulse is short-term. Duty is long-term. Most people believe their emotions are reactions to reality, but often your emotion is a reaction to your interpretation of reality, and interpretations are optional. The latency window is where you choose the interpretation you are willing to live with. If you skip the window, you accept the first interpretation your mind offers, which is usually the most dramatic one. That's why your mind says, "They are disrespecting me," instead of "they are stressed," or "they are careless," or "they are busy," or "this is not about me." Drama is not intelligence. Drama is speed plus ego. Here's another reason latency matters. When you respond too fast, you set a standard for other people. You teach them your triggers. You teach them how to move you. You become predictable. And predictability is weakness because it can be exploited. But when you pause, you become hard to play. You become the kind of person whose reactions cannot be purchased with a tone or a look. That is freedom. So how do you build this as a reliable habit, not a one-time performance? You attach it to a cue that always appears. The cue is not the situation. The cue is the bodily acceleration. The moment you feel that acceleration, you treat it like an alarm, not a command. And you do the same sequence every time. Silence, exhale, one question. Silence buys time. Exhale slows the system. The question gives direction. At first, you will fail. The old habit will win. That's normal. You are not proving you are perfect. You are rewiring your reflex. Every time you catch yourself even 1 second earlier than you used to, you are winning. Because control is not a switch. It's a skill. And skills obey training. Now let me sharpen this with a simple image. Imagine two versions of you in the same situation. One version answers immediately. It feels strong for a moment, then spends hours carrying regret and replay. The other version pauses. It feels weak for 3 seconds, then feels strong for the rest of the day. The first version chases relief. The second version builds respect. Not respect from other people, respect from yourself. The Stoics would always choose the second, because inner peace is not comfort. It is authority. In the next part, we are going to go even earlier, before the mind even forms the story. We'll train you to notice the body's first signal the exact second the takeover begins, so your latency starts sooner and becomes almost automatic. If you wait until you can explain the emotion, you are already late. By the time you can say, "I'm angry," the body has already poured fuel into your bloodstream. By the time you can say, "I'm anxious," your mind has already started scanning for threats. Most people try to control the emotion at the level of words and thoughts. But the takeover begins lower, earlier, and quieter. It begins as sensation. This is why you often can't explain why you snapped. The snap wasn't a decision. It was a body sequence, a tightening, a warming, a pressure, a surge. Then the mind arrived to write a story that matched the sensation. The Stoics understood this even without modern neuroscience. They knew impressions strike first. They knew the body reacts before reason speaks, and they trained themselves to catch the impression at the doorstep, not after it has already entered and rearranged the furniture. So smart silence requires a new kind of attention, not constant self-analysis, not paranoia. Just one skill: early detection. You treat your body like a dashboard. You don't get offended by the warning light. You use it. Your body alarm system usually shows up in the same places every time. For some people, it's the throat tightening, like words want to launch. For others, it's a jaw clench, as if the mind is biting down on the moment. For others, it's the chest pressing inward, the breath becoming small, the face heating, the hands getting restless, the stomach dropping. These are not random. They are your personal signals that the nervous system has shifted into protection mode. And protection mode makes you impulsive. Here is the move that changes everything. The second you detect the signal, you don't ask, "Why am I like this?" You don't chase the cause. You label the state as early capture. Just that, early capture. Not as a diagnosis, as a warning. You're telling yourself, "My system is speeding up. and speed creates stupidity. That single label creates separation, the same separation we've been building, but now it happens before the story forms. Now comes the practice that looks almost too simple. You fix the breath before you fix the thought. Not deep breathing like a spa, controlled breathing like a commander. One slow exhale that is longer than the inhale. When you do this, you're not trying to be calm. You are telling your nervous system, we are not in danger. And the nervous system listens more to breath than to philosophy. Most people talk themselves into panic. They think their thoughts create their feelings, but in many moments, it is the opposite. Your physiology creates the mood, and then your mind tries to justify it. That's why you can wake up anxious without a reason. The body is tense, and the mind goes hunting for a story to attach to that tension. If you only try to argue with the story, you miss the source. The source is the body being wound up. So let's make this practical with a question you can use like a key. When the alarm hits, ask, where is the tension located? Not what is the problem. Where is the tension? The answer forces you out of narrative and into observation. Observation is calmer than interpretation. Observation is power. And the moment you observe, you are no longer fully possessed. You are present. You're back. Now you add one more layer. You widen your field of attention. When you're captured, attention becomes narrow. It locks onto the person, the message, the threat. That narrowness is what makes the emotion feel urgent. So widen it intentionally. Notice your feet on the ground. Notice the room temperature. Notice the weight of your body. Notice one sound in the environment that has nothing to do with the trigger. This is not distraction. This is restoring a normal field of awareness. It tells the mind, this is not the whole universe. This is one moment inside a bigger reality. The Stoics called this seeing things as they are. Here's the hidden benefit of early detection. It reduces collateral damage. Most emotional mistakes happen in the first minute, the first sentence you say, the first text you send, the first tone you use. If you can catch the body signal and buy even 10 seconds, you protect yourself from saying the thing you will later spend hours repairing. 10 seconds can save a relationship. 10 seconds can save your reputation. 10 seconds can save your self-respect. You might ask, why does the body react so strongly in ordinary situations? Because the body doesn't know the difference between a lion and a social threat. Your nervous system evolved to protect you from danger, but in modern life it often treats embarrassment, rejection, or disrespect as survival threats. So it mobilizes energy to fight or flee. That mobilization feels like truth. It is not truth. It is chemistry, and chemistry can be handled. This is where Smartsilence becomes a form of courage, because it takes courage to feel the surge and not dump it onto someone else. It takes courage to feel the heat and not become cruel. It takes courage to feel the fear and not become controlling. Most people call reactions strength because reactions are loud, but real strength is quiet. Real strength is the ability to hold intensity without releasing it as damage. In the next part, we're going to expose the next layer that makes emotions explode, the narrative virus, the story that infects the moment and multiplies suffering. Once you learn how to recognize that story forming, you'll stop feeding the emotion and you'll start cutting it at the root. You can survive almost any event. What breaks you is the story your mind attaches to it. The story is what turns a delay into rejection, a disagreement into humiliation, a mistake into identity. The Stoics understood this with brutal clarity. It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things. People repeat that line like a quote for a poster, but if you take it seriously, it becomes a weapon, because it means your emotional suffering is often optional, not because you can switch it off, but because you can stop feeding it with interpretation. A narrative virus has a pattern. It begins with a fact, then instantly adds meaning, then adds a future. Fact, they didn't respond. Meaning, I don't matter. Future, this always happens. I'm going to be abandoned. Fact, they criticized me, meaning they think I'm incompetent. Future, I'm going to fail, everyone will see. Fact, they laughed, meaning they are mocking me. Future, I'm disrespected, I have to strike back. Notice the speed. Your mind doesn't just report, it predicts, accuses, and sentences, all in one breath. And when you live inside that movie, your body reacts as if it is real. So smart silence is not only about slowing down the body, it's about cleaning the mind. Not with optimism, with accuracy. Accuracy is calming. Drama is inflaming. And the virus is drama disguised as certainty. Here's the most important shift. You must treat your first story as a suspect. Not because you are broken, but because first stories are built from fear, ego, and habit. Your mind's first interpretation is usually the one that protects your pride, even if it destroys your peace. It would rather be right and angry than wrong and calm. That is why the narrative virus is so persuasive. It gives you a role: victim, hero, judge, executioner. It makes you feel significant. It also makes you suffer. So we're going to install a mental filter, a STOIC checkpoint. When the story forms, you ask, is this a fact, or is this my mind adding meaning? Say it slowly inside, fact or meaning. This single question changes the texture of the moment. It takes you out of the movie and puts you in the director's chair. And the director can cut scenes. The actor cannot. Most people believe emotional control means changing the feeling. But often the feeling is attached to a story that is not verified. You feel anger because you believe you were disrespected. You feel jealousy because you believe you are being replaced. You feel anxiety because you believe disaster is coming. If the belief is weak, the emotion collapses. Not because you forced it down, but because you removed its fuel. Now, I want to show you the 4 common viruses that infect almost every trigger. The first is mind reading. You assume you know what they meant, what they think, what they're doing to you. The second is catastrophe. You jump from a small issue to the worst possible outcome and treat it as likely. The third is the courtroom. You begin collecting evidence, building a case, rehearsing arguments, preparing punishment. The fourth is identity attack. You turn a moment into a statement about who you are. I'm not respected, I'm not enough, I'm failing, I'm unlovable. This last one is the most toxic because it locks you into a role and makes your emotion feel like self-defense. The Stoic move is not to deny reality, but to remove assumptions. You strip the event down to what you can prove. That's why facts are so powerful. Facts are quiet. Stories are loud. Facts keep you stable. Stories make you reactive. So here's a practice you can do in real time. When you feel the story inflating, compress it into 10 words. Facts only. 10 words. This forces your mind to cut the drama. For example, they didn't reply for 3 hours. They disagreed with my idea in the meeting. They raised their voice during the conversation. I made a mistake on the task. That's it. No meaning, no motive, no prophecy. When you compress it like this, you can feel the emotional intensity drop slightly. That drop is control returning. Now comes a key point people hate to accept. The narrative virus often exists to protect your ego. It tells you the problem is them so you don't have to face your own fear. It tells you you're being attacked so you can justify attacking back. It tells you you're rejected so you can withdraw before you risk vulnerability. This is why smart silence is also a form of honesty. You stop using stories to escape responsibility for your own inner discipline. Ask yourself this, and be ruthless. If I remove the story, what remains? Usually what remains is smaller than your reaction. And if what remains is smaller, your response can be smaller too. That's the win. Small responses preserve energy. Large reactions waste it. This doesn't mean people are always innocent. Sometimes they are rude. Sometimes they are selfish. Sometimes they are wrong. But even when they are wrong, Your mind still has a choice. Create a clean interpretation that leads to an effective response, or create a toxic interpretation that leads to a regretful reaction. The Stoics were not naive. They saw human flaws clearly. Their advantage was that they refused to let other people's flaws dictate their inner state. They refused to be ruled from the outside. So the goal here is not to become passive. It is to become strategic. You can set boundaries without rage. You can correct someone without cruelty. You can walk away without contempt. But you can only do that if your mind is not infected by a story that turns every moment into war. In the next part, we go to the core trigger that makes most people react harder than they ever needed to. Status and respect. The ego that feels watched. Once you see how much of your emotional life is driven by image defense, you'll stop giving people the power to control you with small gestures. There is a trigger underneath most anger that people refuse to admit. It's not logic. It's not justice. It's status. The feeling that you are being lowered in someone else's eyes. The moment you sense disrespect, something in you flares up. Not because your life is in danger, but because your image feels threatened. And the body treats image threat like survival threat. That is why the reaction comes with heat. The mind thinks, if I don't respond, I lose something important. But what exactly are you losing? Often it's not dignity, it's pride. The Stoics were clear on this. Your worth is not decided by the audience, yet most people live as if they are constantly on stage. They speak to protect how they look. They argue to protect how they rank. They react to protect how they feel in front of others. Even when nobody is watching, the mind imagines an audience. And when you live under that imagined gaze, you become tense, reactive, and hungry for control. This is why certain situations hit harder. If someone disrespects you privately, you may handle it. But if it happens in public, your nervous system spikes. If someone corrects you one-on-one, you may accept it. But if it happens in front of others, you feel exposed. That's status defense. The emotion is not just about what was said, it's about what it might imply to the group. And the ego hates being lowered. Here's the danger. When you react from status, your goal becomes domination, not resolution. You want to win the moment, not protect your peace. You want the last word, not the right response. You want to prove you can't be played. But in trying to prove you can't be played, you become easy to play. Because anyone who can pull you into status defense is holding your leash. Smart silence is the act of refusing to grab the leash. So the first step is brutal honesty. When you feel the surge, ask yourself, what am I defending right now? My values or my image? This question cuts through the fog. Values are quiet. Image is loud. Values choose responses that hold integrity. Image chooses responses that look strong. And looking strong often produces weakness later because it creates conflicts you didn't need, enemies you didn't need, and regret you didn't need. The Stoics trained for insult because insult was a perfect test. An insult tries to make you move. It tries to pull a reaction out of you like a puppet string. It says, respond now, or you are nothing. But the Stoic answer is simple. I am not forced. If someone thinks less of me, that is their mind, not my reality. My dignity is not stored in their opinion. It is stored in my conduct. And conduct is something I control. Now, this does not mean you accept disrespect. It means you choose how you respond. There is a difference between being calm and being passive. Calm is controlled force. Passive is surrendered force. Smart silence aims for controlled force. Sometimes that means saying nothing. Sometimes it means setting a boundary. Sometimes it means walking away. Sometimes it means a short sentence delivered without heat. The key is that your nervous system doesn't get to choose for you. You choose. Here's a mental move that turns status threat into clarity. When you feel offended, translate the moment into this. My ego wants a performance. My character wants a decision. Ego says, show them. Character says, choose the clean action. That's the split. That's where discipline begins. Because if you can see the ego wanting a performance, you can refuse to perform. Most people don't realize how often they are negotiating respect. They change their tone to be taken seriously. They over-explain to avoid being misunderstood. They argue to avoid feeling small. They interrupt to avoid losing the floor. All of this is fear wearing the mask of confidence. The Stoics would say, a person who needs to prove strength is not strong. Real strength is self-contained. It doesn't advertise. So try this when you're triggered by disrespect. Before you speak, ask, what would a self-respecting person do if no one were watching? That question removes the audience. It restores privacy. It pulls you out of the social game and back into your own standards. And when you act from standards, you stop being a slave to reactions. There's another layer here that matters. Many people react hardest not because they were disrespected, but because the disrespect touched an insecurity they already carry. If you secretly fear you're not competent, criticism feels like exposure. If you secretly fear you're not lovable, distance feels like rejection. If you secretly fear you're weak, someone's tone feels like domination. The trigger is not only the event, it's the wound. Smart silence gives you the power to notice that and not punish the other person for a fear that belongs to you. So your practice is to separate two things, what they did and what it awakened. If what it awakened is old, your reaction will be disproportionate. That's the sign. When the reaction is bigger than the event, you are fighting history, not the present. And the present does not deserve that violence. The Stoic aim is simple. Let no one have the ability to steal your composure by poking your pride. Pride is fragile. It demands protection. Dignity is stable. It needs no defense. Dignity is proven by restraint. In the next part, we're going to deal with the place where people lose hours, not seconds. The inner courtroom, the mental trial that keeps you furious long after the event is gone. Because many people don't just react in the moment. They keep reacting in their head for days. We're going to end that. Most people think the problem is the argument they had. The real problem is the argument they keep having afterward. The conversation ends, but inside you it continues. You replay the moment like a trial. You rehearse what you should have said. You imagine what they meant. You collect evidence. You craft the perfect response. You sharpen your tone in your head, and every time you replay it, your body relives it. That's why you can be sitting in a quiet room and still feel your chest tighten as if the threat is present. The event is over. The prosecution is not. This is the inner courtroom, and it steals more peace than any external conflict ever could. The Stoics would call this voluntary suffering, not because you chose the event, but because you keep consenting to the mental rehearsal. You keep feeding it attention, and attention is food. The mind is not replaying the scene to help you. It's replaying the scene to restore a feeling of control. In the moment, you didn't control what happened. In the replay, you get to rewrite it. You get to win. You get to punish. You get to prove. But the cost is your nervous system never stands down. You stay mobilized, tense, bitter, ready. You don't recover. So let's name the illusion. The inner courtroom feels productive, but it is not. It feels like preparation, but it is addiction. Addiction to moral superiority, addiction to vindication, addiction to being right. And being right is a very expensive drug because it buys you a moment of ego relief and sells your peace for hours. Smart silence ends the courtroom by changing the goal. Instead of trying to win the mental case, you try to close it. And closing it requires one decision. I will stop treating this as an emergency that needs constant review. Here's the first principle. Your mind will always find new arguments if you keep asking it for them. So you stop asking. You stop requesting interpretations. You stop requesting motives. You stop requesting revenge scripts. You switch from analysis to action. The Stoics were obsessed with this. They didn't live to debate reality. They lived to respond well to reality. response, not rumination. So when you notice the replay starting, you use a short interruption line that feels almost too blunt, but bluntness is useful. You say inwardly, the trial is closed, not as denial, as a boundary. The mind will push back and say, but they were wrong. Maybe they were. The trial is still closed. But I need to understand. You understand enough. The trial is closed. But I need to protect myself. Protect yourself by not poisoning your own mind for free. The trial is closed. Now, closing the trial does not mean you learned nothing. It means you extract the lesson once, and then you stop bleeding. Most people confuse learning with reliving. Learning is one clean sentence. Reliving is punishment. So here is the method. When the replay starts, ask, what is the lesson in one sentence? 1. Not a speech, not a manifesto. One sentence. For example, next time I will pause before replying. Next time I will set the boundary earlier. Next time I won't explain myself to someone committed to misunderstanding. Next time I will leave the room when my body starts heating. Then stop. Because the lesson is the only useful product of the event. Everything else is self-harm dressed as morality. This is where you need to understand a painful truth. Some of your rumination is not about the other person. It's about your own self-respect. You're angry that you allowed something. You're angry that you didn't speak. You're angry that you spoke too much. You're angry that you lowered your standard. The courtroom is you trying to repair that feeling by imagining a better performance. But the repair is not in imagination. It's in your next action. The Stoics would say, don't demand a perfect past, demand a disciplined next step. Another angle that cuts the courtroom is time. Ask yourself, will this matter in 3 months? Not in theory, in reality. In 3 months, will this person's tone still be important? In 3 months, will this moment still be worth burning your nervous system? This question shrinks the drama. It forces proportion, and proportion is a Stoic virtue. Most suffering is disproportionate attention. But here's the most important move. You must stop expecting closure from other people. Many people keep the trial open because they want the other person to admit, apologize, understand, or validate. And if that doesn't happen, the mind keeps litigating. But closure is not a gift they give you. Closure is a decision you make. Your peace cannot depend on someone else's maturity. If it does, you are hostage. Seneca would tell you this directly. You are allowed to leave the court even if the other side never confesses. You are allowed to stop arguing even if you were right. You are allowed to stop chasing moral victory, because moral victory without peace is not victory. It's pride. So the practice becomes simple and hard. Every time the replay starts, you label it, courtroom. That label creates distance. Then you ask, lesson in one sentence. Then you choose a small action that shifts your state. One action, drink water, walk for 60 seconds, write the lesson down, do one task, not to distract yourself, but to move energy into something real. The nervous system calms when it sees forward motion. Rumination is stuckness. This is why smart silence is not passive. It is decisive. It says, I do not need to win this in my head. I need to govern myself. If there is a boundary to set, I will set it in reality, not in fantasy. If there is a decision to make, I will make it. If there is a lesson to learn, I will learn it once. But I will not keep burning my life to replay a scene that is already gone. In the next part, we'll build what replaces the courtroom in the moment you need to respond. A calm formula, a short internal script that gives you structure under pressure so you don't default to your old patterns. This is where control becomes repeatable. When pressure hits, you don't rise to your ideals. You fall to your training. That's why people who genuinely want to be calm still end up reacting. Their intention is good, but intention is not a structure. In the moment, they have no script, no sequence, no reliable method. So the nervous system improvises, and improvisation under threat usually becomes aggression, defensiveness, over-explaining, or silence filled with resentment. Smartsilence fixes this by giving you a response formula that holds you steady when you would normally drift. This is not about sounding wise, it's about staying clean. Clean means your response is factual, brief, and aligned with your standards. Clean means you don't leak heat into your words. Clean means you don't hand over your dignity just to relieve discomfort. The first step is to return to the only ground that can't betray you: facts. Before you respond, you silently state the event in one sentence, as if you were describing it to a neutral observer. Not your opinion, not your interpretation, not your complaint, just the event. This instantly reduces exaggeration, which is fuel for conflict. Most fights don't grow because of facts. They grow because of expanded meaning. When you anchor to facts, you shrink the fire. Then you do the most underestimated move in human conversation. You take time without asking permission. People fear pauses because they think pauses make them look weak. In reality, pauses make you look unbuyable. A person who can pause is a person who is not controlled by the room. The Stoics would call that freedom. So you pause. You let your body settle for a moment. You exhale once, slow. This pause is not hesitation. It is ownership. Now you choose your aim. Not what you want to say, what you want to achieve. Most people speak to release emotion, not to achieve an outcome. That's why their words create damage. So you ask yourself, what is my aim here? Do I want clarity? Do I want a boundary? Do I want a decision? Do I want peace? If you don't choose the aim, the emotion chooses it for you, and the aim becomes punishment or control. Once the aim is clear, you deliver your response in the smallest number of words necessary. This is where smart silence becomes visible. You don't give speeches. Speeches are usually fear. Over-explaining is often begging to be understood by someone who has already decided to misunderstand you. The Stoic response is concise because it respects energy. It doesn't throw life force into a situation that doesn't deserve it. If you need a boundary, the boundary is one sentence, not a debate. You can say calmly, I'm not available for that tone. You can say, I'll continue this when we're both calm. You can say, no, that doesn't work for me. Notice how these are clean. They don't attack. They don't defend. They are decisions. The mistake people make is they attach an apology and an essay, which turns a boundary into a negotiation. A boundary that needs approval is not a boundary. It's a request. If you need clarity, ask one question, not 5. One question forces focus. A person who is reactive asks questions to corner. A person who is calm asks questions to clarify. The difference is intent. You can ask, what do you mean by that? You can ask, what outcome do you want? You can ask, what is the next step? Questions like these move you away from emotional exchange and into problem solving. That shift alone lowers heat. Here is another key piece. You must remove the urge to correct every misunderstanding in real time. Many people react because they feel misrepresented. They feel someone is seeing them unfairly, so they rush to fix the image. But remember the status trap. Your character is not damaged by someone's misunderstanding. Your character is only damaged by your conduct. So you choose conduct over image. You allow some misunderstandings to pass without chasing them. This is not weakness. This is wisdom. Not every accusation deserves defense. Not every tone deserves attention. Not every opinion deserves your nervous system. Now, let's make the formula internal, so you can apply it anywhere, even when you say nothing out loud. When the trigger hits, you say inside, facts, pause, aim, clean words. Facts, pause, aim, clean words. That's your sequence. It keeps you from being dragged into chaos because it forces you into order. And order is what emotions hate, because emotions want immediacy. Order creates distance. Distance creates choice. You might worry that being calm makes you less powerful. The opposite is true. When you respond with heat, you are being led by the other person. They pulled the reaction out of you. When you respond with calm, you lead. You dictate the pace. You decide what happens next. In negotiation, in relationships, in conflict, the calmer person often has the advantage because they are not leaking information. Anger reveals your buttons. Calm hides them. Calm makes you unpredictable in the best way. This is also why smart silence is persuasive. When you don't escalate, the other person is forced to meet the reality of their own behavior. When you keep your tone clean, their tone looks worse by contrast. You don't need to accuse. Your composure becomes the mirror. And most people either calm down in front of that mirror or they expose themselves further. Either outcome benefits you. So take this seriously. Your goal is not to win the moment. Your goal is to respect yourself tomorrow. If you keep that aim, your responses become simpler, cleaner, and more effective. You stop doing emotional labor for people who are committed to disorder. You stop negotiating with impulses. You become someone who cannot be rushed into regret. In the last part, we're going to tie everything together in a vow. Not a motivational speech, a discipline. The kind of discipline that makes you unshakable without turning you cold. The kind that makes your peace feel earned. Most people secretly believe emotional control will make them less human. Like if they stop reacting, they will become distant, numb, indifferent. That fear is why they keep choosing heat. Heat feels alive. Heat feels strong. Heat feels honest. But heat is often just a lack of skill. The Stoics never aimed to become cold. They aimed to become free. And freedom is not the absence of feeling. Freedom is the ability to feel without being ruled. So here's the vow, and it's simple enough to remember when your body is burning. I will not give my mind away. Not to a tone, not to a look, not to a delayed message, not to someone else's chaos. I will not donate my peace to a moment that cannot pay me back. This vow is not a promise to be calm forever. It's a promise to return to yourself the moment you notice you've left. Because that's what we trained throughout this session. The moment you lose yourself, you return. Not with shame, with discipline. You catch the capture earlier. You build latency, you read the body alarm, you refuse the narrative virus, you stop defending status, you close the inner courtroom, you use the response formula. All of that is one skill wearing different faces. You separate what happens from what you become. Now let me draw the line that most people never draw. Peace is not something you get when the world behaves. Peace is something you keep when the world doesn't. If your calm depends on other people being polite, your calm is fragile. If your calm depends on things going as planned, your calm is rented. The Stoic aim is owned calm. Owned calm means you carry your center with you. It means the outside can be noisy while the inside stays governed. This is why smart silence works. It trains you to treat triggers like weather. The storm can arrive, but you don't need to move your house into it. You don't need to argue with the clouds. You take shelter in your own principles, and principles are practical. They become decisions. They become a pause. They become a clean sentence. They become a boundary. They become an exit. Not dramatic, not loud, just correct. So here is the identity shift I want you to accept. You are not your first reaction. You are your chosen response. Your first reaction is an ancient system trying to protect you. Your chosen response is your character. That means your character is built in the seconds you used to waste. Those seconds are your training ground. If you reclaim them, you reclaim yourself. And now, a test you can run immediately, not someday. For the next 24 hours, your first response to anything that provokes you is silence. Not silent resentment, not silent punishment. Silence as control. Silence as latency. Silence as the space where you decide. You will feel the ego demand speed. You will feel the mind demand a story. You will feel the urge to correct, to prove, to strike, to explain. Let it rise and don't obey it. Exhale once. Ask what is required of you. Speak only when your words are clean, brief, and aimed. You'll notice something in those 24 hours. The world will not end because you didn't react. People will not collapse because you didn't perform. In fact, many situations will dissolve on their own when you don't feed them. And the ones that don't dissolve will become clearer. You'll see who respects boundaries and who only respects force. You'll see which conflicts were real and which were just momentum. You'll see how often your peace was being taxed by habits you never questioned. If you want a final question to carry with you, let it be this: what response will I respect tomorrow? Not what response will feel good now. Not what response will make me look strong. What response will I respect tomorrow? That question pulls you out of impulse and into dignity. It turns you from a reactor into a ruler of self. This is what Seneca would want for you: not comfort, but command. Not numbness, but clarity. Not silence as avoidance, but silence as strength. When you can sit inside a surge and remain intact, you become dangerous in the best way. Dangerous to your old habits, dangerous to manipulation, dangerous to chaos. And that is real peace, earned peace, the kind no one can take.